Welcome to the Nomadic Network. I'm Luke and I'm hosting today's event. You might have seen me before. I've done a few of these. I'm an author of travel-inspired thriller novels, as I was just telling Danny, and a travel addict as well. I've been in one place for 4 weeks now and I'm ready to get on the road again. I feel like I have a sort of a 4-week limit of being in one place, so I like to get going. So it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Nomadic Network. Whilst we're starting here, let's test out this chat box. Let's see where you're calling in from. Let's see where you are, and let's see how many of these events you've been to before. It's lovely to see people listening from all around the world. We are international. That's what we do. And it's nice to see that there are people here who might be brand new to the Nomadic Network. And there might be people who have been here a while. Marisha just says, I can't hear anything. I assume the fact that everyone else is saying where they are means that they can hear me. You can hear me, can't you, Danny? We just had a conversation, so you certainly can. Yeah, fine. Maybe try dropping out, Marisha, and coming back in again. That sometimes works. So we've got Pennsylvania, St. Lucia. Wow, Castisha from St. Lucia. Dan from Manchester. I assume that's the one in the States, not the one near me here in England. Vancouver, California, Milwaukee. Oh, loads of people, lots of American listeners, lots of anyone else in Europe. Be interesting to hear, interesting to see. So let me run through this presentation and we'll tell you a little bit about the Nomadic Network. Those of you who have been here several times will know it, but please listen in anyway, because there might be something you don't remember. Oh, here we are, Hoda in Leicester, UK. That's 25 miles from me, Hoda. You're very, very close. Welcome to the Nomadic Network. We are all about travel, as you know, and meeting like-minded travelers. It was founded by Nomadic Matt, the man himself. There he is in 2019. And we've hosted over 250 virtual events in that time. And we're back to hosting in-person events, which I'll tell you about in a minute. And there's a brand new website, Nomadic Network, thenomadicnetwork.com. Here are some photos from some of the wonderful Nomadic Network in-person events that have happened recently. I can't help but see this and smile. It's so great to see all of these people coming together, joined by their love of travel in various places around the world. So we're all over the socials, Instagram, TikTok, the virtual events that we are here, and we'll be telling you more about the group tours a bit later as well. So many of those coming up this summer, and it's time to get them booked if that's something that you're interested in. So a reminder about the session today. It's really nice for me and for Danny, who's presenting today, to see that you're here, to see your faces, to see you focused on what she's talking about. So if you are in a position to have your camera on, I'd love that. That's fantastic. Please keep yourself muted. Please keep yourself muted and use the chat for questions. If you've got a question for Danny, we'll have time for that later. Just type question and then what you want to ask, and I will put that to one side and ask her it on your behalf when the time is right. Please make sure you follow our speakers and support them in all the ways possible. They do this out of the kindness of their hearts. This is just for you, and so if you fancy following Danny on Instagram and TikTok and the various other things, I'll post those in the chat shortly. Right, let's have fun and enjoy this together. Danny, a bit of an introduction about you. You're a solo budget backpacker, podcaster and freelancer who has been nomadic for almost 4 years. You started your journey with a solo trip to India, which is one of my favorite travel destinations actually, and hasn't stopped since. Danny hosts the podcast while she's away, where she interviews fellow female travelers on their travel experience and expertise in order to help women live their best lives exploring the world. Danny, welcome to the Nomadic Network. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to share today.
Absolutely. Me too. Right, let's jump straight into it. I'm excited to hear what you've got to say.
Okay. Hi, everyone. As you know, because you signed up for this event, I'm going to be sharing about becoming an English teacher in Spain today. So I'm going to give you a rundown of everything we're going to cover, my experience, and just all the details you'll need to be able to do this yourself if you're interested. But first, so like I said, what we'll cover, how I ended up teaching in Spain, what the program is, kind of how it works, the application process, which can be a bit lengthy, the visa process, which can also be a bit lengthy. So I'll give you some kind of like tips and insights into what that's actually looks like. The moving logistics when it comes to actually arriving in Spain, things to do before you go, things to do on arrival, other tips for living in Spain, and just some general questions that you guys will be able to ask at the end of this. So I know I was already given a little intro, but I want to share a little bit about myself as well. So like I said, my name is Dianni. I started traveling, like was mentioned before, in 2019. When I was 23, I took my first solo trip to India, which led to me continuing to travel. I actually applied to this Spanish English teaching assistant program in Spain when I was in Thailand, because a friend that I had met told me about it, that they knew a friend who did it. And so I was really interested, and I was working on the application while I was traveling. While I was in Laos, the application was sent, and then I found out that I got accepted when I got back to New Jersey. So that was really exciting. And I spent a whole year living in Spain, even though this program is only 8 months long. I also did some au pairing after that. I'm a travel podcaster. I host the podcast while she's away. And I'm also a queer traveler and 26 years old. So that is a little bit about me. And now we'll get into what you came here for, the good stuff. So to start off about my experience specifically, I think it's important to mention that like every experience looks different. And there's actually a lot of different ways to apply to this program specifically. So this is the one way that you can do it directly through the Spanish Ministry of Education. But if you do some extra research, there are a lot of different programs that you can do English teaching assistant in private schools, in Madrid specifically, in different areas, and it can kind of look very different varying on the program. But this is how I did it. So I did it through the Spanish Ministry of Education. I was placed in a school in Cartaya, which is like a small pueblo, small town in the south of Spain, in Andalusia, in that region. But I actually lived in Huelva. So this picture here on like the right-hand corner, that is the city that I lived in, and had beautiful sunsets. It was so lovely. I absolutely adored it. It was like a 20-30 minute bus ride from the beach. So on weekends when the weather was nice, we would always go down to the beach. The school, like I mentioned, that I worked in was in Cartaya, which was a small town. And these are some of the kids that I had. I loved them. I was in an elementary school. So because I was there for 8 months, they kind of broke it up into 2-month sections. So every 2 months, I would switch the classrooms I was in. So I started off in the 6th and 5th grade, and then moved to the 4th and 3rd, 2nd and 1st. And then I was with the younger kids by the end of the year. So I got to spend some individualized time with each kind of group of kids along the way. I also really loved living where I lived in Huelva, because it's a small city. So it was really easy to meet the other auxiliares, the other English teaching assistants who were working in different schools, because there aren't that many foreigners in the city that I was living in. And it made it easy to meet other English teaching assistants, but also other Spaniards, because there weren't that many foreigners. It was easy to connect with locals, because you had kind of no choice but to make friends with locals. And it was a great opportunity to practice your Spanish and things like that. And I will say this program is not only open to people in the US. Obviously, I'm from the US, so that's how I did it. But I met a lot of people who were doing it from Scotland, from the UK, from Ireland, and different places as well. So I lived in Huelva, but one of the biggest highlights I think about doing this program is that you get 3-day weekends, which allows you to be able to do a decent amount of traveling. And Spain has a lot of like holidays. So there's a lot of time off. In April, you have Semana Santa for a week, and there's just varying different holidays throughout the year that give you a lot of time to be able to travel when you want to. So some of the places I was able to go were Granada, Sevilla, because Huelva, where I was living, is an hour south of Sevilla. So it was like a quick bus ride to get to Sevilla. And I spent quite a few weekends there. It's a beautiful, lovely city in the south of Spain. I went to Nerja, Cádiz, Malaga, and just did a lot of traveling within the Andalusia region. of Spain. I was also fairly close to Portugal and didn't get to make it over there on this trip, but it was a great place to kind of come and go and be able to travel quite a bit from where I was. So some of the benefits of doing this program, I think you guys are on here, so you probably already know some of these things, but some of the things that were highlights for me and benefits for me, of course, gaining teaching experience. At this time, I was also in the process of getting a TEFL certification, teaching English as a foreign language. So this was a great opportunity for me to see if I enjoyed teaching and wanted to keep doing it during my travels, and if I wanted to be something to become a part of my travels long term, if I could see myself working in a school, if I could see myself continuing to work with kids in that way. So if you're looking to gain some teaching experience, this would be a great way to do it. That's maybe like part-time or low stakes or low risk, I guess. Learning Spanish, of course, that is a great thing and thing you're able to do and kind of focus on while you're living in Spain. And I'll get more into detail on ways you can do that. Of course, getting out of your comfort zone and moving to a new country is always a great way to get out of your comfort zone. And it gives you the ability to kind of really get to know a new culture and like live in and experience the culture rather than just traveling through for a few weeks at a time. So I'm going to give you now kind of the more like nitty gritty details of what the actual program is and the application process and all of those components of it. So to start the program, the North American Language, and Cultural Assistant Program is a public diplomacy program, and it's run by the Spanish Ministry of Education. And it allows it says native-like. So even if English isn't your first language, as long as you're fluent or close to native speaking, it still counts. So native-like English speakers to become language assistants in Spain. Placements are offered all around Spain. And when we get to the application portion, I'm going to go more in depth into that, but you can apply basically to any area that you want, but the applications are more based on region than like specific cities or towns. So you'll be picking regions of Spain that you would want to potentially live in when you're doing the application. But the actual program runs from October 1st to May 31st. And I think it's a perfect amount of time for you to get kind of a taste of living somewhere. It's not a full year. It's not a huge, time commitment. It's 8 months total. So that's what I really liked about it as well. And they're actually accepting applications right now from February 9th until April 4th. So if at the end of this presentation, you decide it is something you want to do, you can go ahead and get started on the application process right away. And some other further details, you work about 14 to 20 hours a week inside of the school. So it's very part-time, but I will say, and we'll touch on this a little bit later, but lesson planning included, of course, is something that does take a little bit more time. So you'll be doing probably an extra 10 hours a week or so of actually lesson planning for the classes and stuff that you're working in. And I will say that you get a $800 to €1,000 stipend every month while you're there. And I will say, since there's a lot of Americans in this chat, in this presentation, that doesn't sound like a lot of money. But for Spain, it's actually quite livable. For example, I was in Huelva in the south and I was making €700 a month, but my rent was only 200 and my phone bill was 20. And so kind of the majority of my income was just for my travels, for fun things I wanted to do on the weekend, for my own expenses. And there weren't really a lot of additional costs because it was fairly affordable to live. If you're in a bigger city like Madrid, you'll probably get closer to $1,000 because the rent is more expensive, but it is fairly livable, even though it may not sound like it right off the bat. And you do get medical insurance through this program, so that's not something you have to worry about handling or doing yourself, but housing and flights are not included. So we'll definitely get more into that, what it looks like, finding housing and things like that. But just so you're aware, those things are not included. So some of the program requirements. First of all, for this program specifically, like I mentioned, there are ways to do it if you're a UK citizen or for somewhere else, you might have to do some research, but there's definitely ways to do it that way. For this specifically, as a US citizen, you need a valid passport. You need to have a BA, BS, AA, or AS degree, or be enrolled in a program at this time. You need to be a native like English speaker, in good physical and mental health, and have a clean background check, and be between the age of 18 and 60. So in terms of working at the school, let's talk about your job, what that'll look like specifically. I just have to say, this picture with all my kids, this was on my birthday, and they bought me a gift for my birthday and made me like a huge card, which was so cute. They'd made me like a huge card and got me little presents, and it was really, really sweet. I cried because they were so adorable. But for your job specifically, you can get placed in a school ranging anywhere from working with 3-year-olds that are quite young to adult students. And I had several friends who were actually in both. They were split half the year with younger students and then split half the year in an adult school as well. So that is something that could happen. It doesn't usually happen, but it's also a possibility. One thing to know when it comes to working in the school and lesson planning and stuff, you may not necessarily know the kids' level of English. Because I was in like a small school in the south of Spain, kind of on the countryside, most of my kids didn't really know any English at all. I maybe had a few who knew some basics, but for the most part, they didn't know much. And so it was a lot more just coming up with like fun interactive games for them to learn vocab and things like that. So for example, if you can see like these little planets here, I did a little project with one of the younger classes. They were learning the planets in Spanish. And so I did a little project where they could color and cut them out. And it's not on here, but they would write the names like in English and place them on the correct planet. And it would just be coming up with little creative ideas like that were quite simple for them to like learn the basic vocab and weren't too intense. Other things that I would do, say if they were learning, I don't know, plants or something like that, we would do like team games where the class would be split in half. And then I would say the word in Spanish and they would have to like run up to the board and write the English vocab word or something like that. And their team would get points, which they loved because they were always fairly competitive. So like I said, it's just coming up with fun interactive games to engage the kids in learning the vocab. And they would get really excited about it and interested, which made my job so much fun. Another thing to mention is because you're an English teaching assistant, you are not in the classroom alone with the students. You are usually with a teacher. So if the class is a 45-minute class, it would be split up sometimes between you doing a lesson or a game or something for half the time, and then the teacher doing a lesson or a game or something for the other half of the time. And then while the teacher is speaking or teaching, you could walk around and help them individually with specific things. And technically, you're not supposed to be left in the classroom with the students alone. That did happen on occasions for me, but it's technically one of the rules that you're not supposed to be. So if we're going to get into the application process, what that actually looks like. So first of all, some of the required documents and things that you're going to need. You're going to need a copy of your main page of your passport. You're going to need either an official college transcript or a copy of your diploma. You're going to need a signed statement of purpose. And that's basically, it's very short. It's like 250 words to 300 words about why you want to do the program, why you would be a good asset, why you're interested, that sort of thing. It's a very short statement, and a letter of recommendation. So before you're applying, some things to kind of get together are, renew your passport if that's necessary, ask professor or a mentor or an employer, someone, that can speak highly of you for a letter of recommendation to apply, and then research regions of Spain. So this is what I mentioned before. On the application process, you are able to select 3 main regions and kind of like tier them. You can also pick like if you want to be in a major city, small city, rural area, and you kind of can select. You may not always get your first choices in these things, but they do give you the option to write them down. So, but like I said, you can research what regions of Spain you would like to be in. So like here, I put the little map down here. This is kind of how the regions are sectioned off. I was in Andalusia, which is like the red area down here. But, you know, maybe you want to be in Catalonia, maybe you want to be in Galicia. You can kind of categorize those places on your application. And you're going to create a Profex account. That's like the online application portal where you'll be submitting all of your documents, filling out the application, checking your acceptance status. And yeah, they kind of keep it very concise. It might be a little bit difficult to navigate, but they're really great about giving you videos, resources to help you navigate and fill out the application correctly. So when it comes to actually being accepted, you will get an email saying admitada. And that just means that your application has been reviewed and approved, but not fully accepted. That just means like you had all the right documents in, you had everything you needed, but it hasn't been accepted. You will be notified via email that you have been accepted. And when that happens, you have, I'm pretty sure, 3 days to either accept or deny. To deny, you don't have to do anything. If you get the application, if you get the acceptance and they're like, you got this region and maybe that's somewhere you didn't want to go and you decide that, okay, I actually don't want to do this anymore, you just don't have to say anything and it'll get passed on to the next person. But you will get notified via email. And if you don't receive an email, you probably did not receive an acceptance. So that's basic. They don't send out like a rejection letter or anything. You just don't hear from them. And another thing to mention is that it's first come, first serve basis. So if there's a really specific region of Spain that you really want, I would say, like I said, the application process is right now from February 9th, I believe I said, till April. If there's a specific area that you want to be in, I would say to send that application as soon as possible, because if you wait until April, the chances of you getting the area that you want are probably less likely. And the sooner you send it, the better, because it's a first come, first serve sort of thing. So for the visa process, what that kind of looks like, you must apply for your visa before leaving to Spain. And you're going to be applying for a student visa, not a work visa. And the visa process can be a bit sticky and quite complicated, because if you're in the US specifically, you'll have to go to one of the, I think there's only like 10, or there's only a few consulates for you to be able to go to. So you'll have to find the one closest to you. I'm in New Jersey, so it's kind of nice that the one closest to me is in New York. It's like a 30-minute drive into the city for me, or I can take the train. It's not so bad. I had a friend who lives in Colorado. The closest consulate to her was in Los Angeles, and she had to fly and stay over in LA in order to like get to the consulate. And because you have to pick up and drop off the application and visa in person, it kind of is a pain in the process, but it's just a part of it. So a few things to mention. You will need to keep the letter of acceptance that comes in the mail. That letter of acceptance is vital to your visa process. And so as soon as you get that in the mail, make sure you hold on to it. And it also has a lot of important information in it, like where your placement is exactly, the name of your school, who your coordinator is at the school that you're going to be working at, and all of those details. So you must hold on to that. Number 2, schedule an appointment as soon as you possibly can, because as soon as you know that you've been accepted, as soon as you see in Profex that your application status has changed, or you get that email, I would definitely schedule your appointment, because it can be a bit of a pain. Sometimes they only have them available, a month, 2 months out, and maybe you have to take off work or some sort of thing. So I would say the first thing to do is immediately book that, and do not purchase flights until you've received your visa, because it can be, they can say it'll take this amount of time, it might take less, it might take more. So these are all things to keep in mind. Like I've kind of hinted at, the process is long. So start gathering your documents as soon as your status says plaza aceptada in the Profex. And on the next slide, we'll go into like some of the documents and things you're going to need for the visa process. And another thing to keep in mind, each Spanish consulate kind of has a slightly different visa application process. So make sure you check the requirements of your specific consulate. Okay. So documents. These are just a few of the things you're going to need. There is the national visa application form that you're going to need to fill out. You're going to need a recent passport size color photo, a valid unexpired passport, proof of acceptance to the program. So this is required for the visa process. And that's why it said once that letter comes in the mail, make sure you keep that because you're going to need it for this whole process. Proof of financial means, that is also your acceptance letter because it shows how much you're going to be making. Proof of health insurance, that's also your acceptance letter. So these are all things that you're going to need. You're going to have to get an FBI or state police background check. Local police background checks are not accepted. So I will say that a state background check takes less time. So if you have the option of doing that, I would definitely do that instead of an FBI background check. And also, you have to get an apostille, which basically just means to get your background check internationally legalized. And you can usually do that like at UPS or something like that, but that can take some time to have done. So doing it as soon as possible is probably beneficial. Also, all of your documents must be translated by an approved translator, apparently. I will say I did not do this in my own process. I don't know if I missed it while I was doing everything, or I don't know. I just opted out of that, but my application was still accepted, obviously, and I didn't have an issue. I have had friends who did the program say that they know people who their application was rejected because they didn't have everything translated. So make sure you do this just as a precaution. You don't want to go through the whole visa process and then at the end of it get rejected because you didn't get your documents translated. So just another thing to keep in mind. So before you go, let me move this over here so I can see you guys still. Okay. Before you go. So I would say do lots of research. In terms of once you know the region you're going to be in, researching that culture. I was in Andalusia. There were some things I wanted to learn about Andalusia before I arrived. Maybe cultural norms or cultural differences. In the US, we don't have siestas in the middle of the day. That was something that I learned about once I got to Spain, and I got to the south of Spain, that stores close from 2 to 4 p.m. or something around that range. So you can't go grocery shopping or or everyone just kind of takes a nap, which I think is amazing. And I loved that. So there was just some aspects that I didn't know about and some things I wanted to learn before I arrived. Maybe other languages that are spoken in the area that you're going to be in. I was in Andalusia and they speak Spanish, but maybe you're in Catalunya and they speak Catalan if you're in Barcelona or something like that. So those are things to be aware of, because if you're going with the intention of, maybe learning more Spanish and you end up in Barcelona where they speak mainly Catalan, it might be a little bit more difficult for you. Research places you'll want to go, you'll want to travel to, and things you'll want to do. I will say, try your best to start practicing Spanish as soon as possible if you don't have a conversational or basic level, because on arrival, which we'll get into, there are some things that you're going to have to do when you're moving to a new country, and it'll just help you a lot to have the Spanish to be able to do that. Save up some money before you go is something I will also say. I went with a nice little chunk of savings, so it allowed me to yes, like I said, the stipend is livable, but it's nice to have savings to do the trips you want to do and extra things on the weekends and not kind of be in a crunch for money. So if you go with some savings, definitely think that's really helpful. I would say talk to previous English language assistants. If you don't know anyone, you have my Instagram and things here. I'm totally open to DMs if you have further questions or just want further assistance with anything. But talk to someone who's done it specifically. And I think that is really helpful. So now you've got accepted, you've done the things beforehand, you're moving to Spain. Here are some resources that'll really help you in the process. So first of all, join Facebook groups. These are a few of the names of the groups that you could join. This is one here, Lady Auxiliares de Conversación en España. These are specific to That one's specific to women, and that's also for all of Spain, but there's other ones specific to your region. So once you have your placement, say you're in Andalusia or your specific city or town that you're going to be in, you can research auxiliares de conversación in that specific region and get like a more intimate group or more detailed group. And once you're in that group, you can start to connect with other people who are going to be living in the same area as you and who are possibly also looking for roommates, looking for apartments, things like that. And so you can start to connect with other people. I found my apartment through Facebook groups, oh my goodness. I found my apartment through Facebook groups. And I ended up connecting with like 3 different girls, and we ended up living together in Huelva. So Facebook groups are really huge and helpful. 2 websites to use if you're searching for apartments are Idealista, and you can find apartment listings on there. And usually apartments are fully furnished, which is a really nice thing. You don't have to worry about like buying a bunch of furniture for a new apartment. And Piso Compartido is another one that you can use to research some apartments. That might be better if you're looking for Spanish-speaking roommates and not just wanting to move in with other Americans or other foreigners. If you wanted a more like intimate experience, a more cultural experience, Piso Compartido is a type of thing where it's just someone posting a room they have for rent rather than like a full apartment listing. So that might be an option that you're interested in. So some best practices for searching for apartments: post in Facebook groups, like I said, or just search in the Facebook groups that you're in, the smaller, more intimate ones specific to your region or city, and see if there's other people posting listings, see if there's other people posting that they're looking for roommates. It's a really great resource, and it'll help you a lot with connecting with other people. I would say try to get there a few weeks before your placement actually starts. So if it starts October 1st, I would say to try to get there like beginning of September if you can, and stay in a Airbnb or hotel or hostel for a few days or a few weeks until you're able, and take that time to like go to the apartments. Maybe you saved a bunch in Idealista or Piso Compartido and you want to go actually look at them in person. Take those few weeks to do that before your program starts, so that way you're kind of settled in already. If you like a specific place and are open to signing a contract or something before actually arriving, I would say like have the landlord send videos, make sure you sign a contract. I know a few people who like moved into places and didn't sign a contract and it didn't really pan out super well for them. So make sure that's something you do. And then I would say a big thing is to keep your location and commute in mind. So I lived in Huelva, even though my school was in Cartaya, and it was a 20-30 minute bus ride, not too bad, but I wouldn't live in Cartaya where my school was because it's a really small town and there's not that much to do. So make sure you keep in mind if you're working outside of Madrid, for example, and it's an hour commute, is that something that you want to be doing on a daily basis just to be able to live in Madrid? Or would you be more willing to live in somewhere closer to where your school is? So these are all factors and things to keep in mind when searching for places, and be realistic about what you're willing to have your commute look like. Things that you're going to have to do on arrival. This is my horrendous residency card photo, but you're going to have to get a residency card. And I don't have enough time to go into full detail of what that looks like on here, but just something to keep in mind. That's something you're going to have to do on arrival. Opening up a bank account. I use Santander and I found it super seamless, easy, and they were super helpful. And setting up a phone plan, I used Vodafone. So going back to what I said about like knowing enough Spanish, these are kind of the things you're going to need to be able to have some. You might get lucky and like find people who speak English, but it does really help to have like a conversational level to go in and be able to do these things on your own. When it comes to just kind of like settling in when you're arriving, if you're looking to make friends that are Spaniards, you want like a more in-depth cultural experience, try to make friends with your coworkers at your school. I know a lot of my friends who made friends with their coworkers and they were invited to like family parties or out for dinners or birthdays and things. And they were really able to like get to know the culture really well through making friends with their coworkers. It can be a bit jarring when you're first getting there because it's a whole new place. Maybe you've never lived abroad before. And that's why one of my favorite things to do was for the first week or two, find my places, the places that feel like home, that I feel comfortable in, my local coffee shop that I really like. And, just those little favorite places that you can go back to on a daily basis, weekly basis, that make it feel more comfortable. Like I said, practice Spanish before you go, but also on arrival, sign up for Spanish classes. I found a tutor, an individualized tutor. So I was seeing her twice a week and we were working one-on-one practicing Spanish together. Or you can find intercambios via Facebook, or there's an app called Tandem that I've used that's been really helpful for you to find other people. Maybe they're maybe they're from Spain or from other places, and their first language is Spanish, and they're looking for someone to do an exchange with and practice their English. So you can find English and English-Spanish language exchanges as well. Side gigs to do. So I knew a few people, and I did as well, who did like tutoring on the side. Sometimes when you're working in your school, maybe some other teachers will say like, oh, I want to tutor twice a week for my kid. That's another great way, outside of, your actual job and saving money that you bring with you, to make some extra money on the side, to do little tutoring gigs individually. And these are just some of those resources that I mentioned. The first one is to the actual application. The second one is for the Idealista for apartment listings. So is this last one. And then this middle one is like the big Facebook group for all of Spain and everyone who is an auxiliar. But I'm pretty sure that's it. I hope you found that helpful. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
So many questions, Dianni. That was wonderful. Thank you. Great presentation. You went into loads of detail. If you've got a question, people listening at home, if you've got a question on the tip of your tongue now, pop it in the chat. I will start to go through them now. Some of these you may have sort of touched upon, Dianni, but I'll repeat them, and you might have to say them again because someone might have missed them or whatever. And there are a lot of people asking about the age of people that can do this program. Now, you said it was open to 18 to 60 year olds. What sort of age was the average person doing this? And did you see people who were nearer the top of that age bracket?
So where I was during my experience, there between like 20 to 35, I think was the main range I was seeing. Of course, the application is open to more. I think my friend who has done this program like 3 years in a row, and that's another thing, you can continue to do it if you want to. But during her first experience, she said that she met a lot of older people that were more in their 40s, even some 50s. So it might depend on like the region you're in, but I met mainly 20s and 30-year-olds.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, is this contract like a set length? Is it the whole academic year? And is there any flexibility in how long you spend there?
So the contract is from October 1st to May 31st. It's not the full academic year. It's a little bit less. I think it's like 8 months. So yeah, that's what the contract looks like. It's not really flexible in you being able to change it around at all. Because of my visa process took a little bit longer, I did start, I think like a week or two later because I couldn't arrive. So if you talk to your coordinator, maybe they'll make some exceptions for that. But just in general, yeah, it's an 8-month program.
Yeah, that's the way. I suppose you're part of those young people's education. You need to be there every day, don't you? You're not just a visitor,
Exactly.
So talking about the lesson plans, then you talked about having extra time for planning, or being able to plan, or having to set that aside. What's the schedule for that? How soon do you have to have them ready? At what sort of level? How often are you expected to plan? What sort of detail are you expected to plan things in?
That can kind of vary a lot. So I'll give you like a general. So basically, when I first started, I was in the classes, and the teachers, because I'm working with several different teachers in different classrooms, their expectations can be kind of different, for how they want me to participate, how they want me to interact. So for some, it was like I was setting up a full lesson of like, okay, this is what we're going to learn in English, teaching it to them, going through the vocab, and then doing some sort of activity to make sure they understood it. So in some cases, I was setting up a full lesson plan in that way. And the teacher would tell you like, okay, here's your schedule. You're in this class 2 days this week. I need it on this day. So there are a lot of guidelines to it. You're not expected to like handle it all on your own. The teachers are there to be helpful resources. If you have questions about like maybe outside of the textbook resources you can use, you can ask them. And also I just did a lot of research on my own. Like I just ended up doing a lot of Googling best way to teach this, games that I can do this with, and also talking to other auxiliaries because they were working in other classrooms. And I had one friend who had done this the year before, so she had a lot of resources already. So make sure you're connecting with the other people who are doing this as well, because they can be a great resource, talking to the teachers, and also just doing your own research and seeing kind of what works and what doesn't. Maybe you like have a game idea and you're really excited about it and you want to try it with them, and maybe their level of English isn't good enough for that game to work. And you're like, okay, that doesn't work. So it can be some trial and error, but it is just very specific to the teacher that you're working with. And I think a lot of the times it's very low level. So like maybe you're planning a worksheet and a game and things like that. It's not a full lesson every day of the week.
Yeah, you're just sort of doing a segment within the wider lesson that the teacher's working on. And I suppose that changes depending on what teacher you're with. You're with different teachers on different days and things.
Yeah. So they can, like I said, they can want different things from you. So maybe one of them wants you to just play a game for like 15 minutes. And then the other teacher's like, okay, here's half the class time, have something prepped for that, you know? And so you kind of have to navigate it depending on the teacher that you're working with and what she wants from you in her classroom, or what they want from you in their classroom.
No, that makes a lot of sense. What sort of level of Spanish do you need to have to do this? And does it work if you know no Spanish? Could you just apply anyway?
It can work if you know no Spanish. I will say it's probably going to be a little bit more difficult for you. I didn't know that much Spanish when I had first arrived, honestly, like very basic level. And I was lucky because a lot of my roommates were fluent. So they were able to kind of help me with things. And I learned a ton along the way. But the very beginning is a very crucial time. Like I said, you're, meeting the people in your school. Maybe not all of the teachers speak English. Maybe you have to set up your bank account. You have to do all these things. And so it does help to have at least some level of Spanish. It's not required, but I think it will definitely help you.
So it's something to do in advance if you're able to. Yes. A different question now. Do you know if anyone has taken their pets with them on an experience like this? Any pet owners on the cord?
That is a good question. I don't know anyone personally who has done it. I feel like it maybe depends on the pet. Like if you have a small dog or something, it might affect like you being able to room with people if they, are okay with pets as well. I don't know specifically.
No, and there will be a few questions I think that you may not know the answer to, including this next one. But if you can answer, that's very helpful. And if any advice you can give is always useful. Someone's asking, why is it a student visa and not if you're not a student? I don't know if you'd know that, or if you just did what you were told.
That's a really good question. I honestly, up to this day, still wonder the same thing. Yeah. I'm not really sure. I guess because it's like I really don't know. I assumed because it was like an English teaching assistant program. I know you're working, but like I don't really know why it's a student visa, honestly, instead of a work visa. But that's just the process. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna get the visa. I will do what I'm told.
No, I can understand that completely. And getting to the end of that visa, so your visa ran out at the end of May. Did you have to sort of clear off and get out of the country at that time, or was your visa a bit longer than the time you were there? Could you have stayed a couple more months had you wanted to?
See, that was always quite vague. I'm pretty sure, though, I'm almost positive that you have your student visa, which is those 8 months. And then as Americans, I'm pretty sure we get an additional 3 months as like a tourist visa. So I think you can stay if you want to. I stayed like a year total, and I did some au pairing during that time of the additional 3 months. I don't know if that's technically allowed, but it's what I did. So I think you can stay up to an additional 3 months after the 8-month period.
I'm sure there's a way to work that out. You might have to look that up though, whoever's asking that. Gosh, these questions are coming in thick and fast now. Great questions though, guys. Watching these at home, so do keep them coming in. You mentioned the place you stayed in was affordable. I assume you're staying with roommates in that situation, would you be able to find, do you think, affordable accommodations if you were staying on your own?
Yes, because I did know a few people who lived on their own. Of course, it's going to be a bit more. I was paying like 200 where I was living. I think the person that was living alone was paying like 350. Of course, that's specific to the area that I was living in Huelva. Maybe I think if you're in like a big city like Madrid or something, living alone probably won't be as feasible, because even with roommates, I know people who pay up to 500 a month, because it's just a bigger city, it's more expensive. So it really depends on where you are. But if you're in Sevilla or a small city or something like that, I think it will be feasible to live on your own. It's just obviously going to be a bit more expensive. Expect to pay probably like an additional like 200 euros a month, and someone who's going to be living with roommates.
I think that's half the fun, isn't it, as well, if you do this, is getting to know people in the same situation.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's different. I can understand wanting your own space, wanting to live alone, but I loved my roommates. We were all really great friends. We're still great friends to this day. And so it was part of the fun for me getting to live with other people. So that's up to you. And you could also just like have one roommate. Like I had three. I had two, and then one more girl moved in because we had a 4-bedroom, but we had a fairly big flat with like a balcony, and it was really large. So it was enough space for all four of us. But you could also have like just one roommate, so you don't have to worry about living with a bunch of people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the way to do it. A question that's come up several times is, do you know of any schemes that, firstly, is there any flexibility on the age for people if they are over 60, or do you know of any schemes that will take applications from people older than 60?
Schemes that will take,
like any systems like this? Say someone, the one person's talked here, they've just turned 61 and would be really interested in doing this, but obviously you said this was 60 was the maximum. Do you know of any where they should start looking, perhaps?
I'm not really sure, to be quite honest. I just know about the 60 like age limit, because that's when I looked at the visa requirements and stuff, the application requirements and stuff on the website. That's what it gives. There possibly are, because there, like I mentioned, there are a lot of other programs and ways that you can go about it. But I don't know what the age limits are for those, and if it changes depending on the way that you apply. So yeah. I'm sorry that's not more helpful, but
no, it's always hard to answer questions that aren't in your that aren't in your experience, aren't it? But I'd certainly recommend the people that are asking these questions to do some research on your own and use the advice Dianni has said about the experience. There must be a way that competent and experienced people would be helpful in the education system all around the world.
Yeah.
Is Spain safe and welcoming for queer people? Someone has asked.
Yes. Depending on where not depending on where you are, because I found it to be very welcoming where I was, but there wasn't that much of a queer community where I was, because it was small and in South, and they're very like Catholic in the South. But when I did some traveling up north, like Madrid has lots, I've lived there for like 3 months, and there's lots of like there's a queer area of the city called Chueca. So there's like one barrio that's like super queer. And so it kind of depends on where you are. I think the south of Spain is a bit more Catholic, more religious, but it doesn't mean you can't find queer community. It just might be a little bit more difficult to, but I've never felt, and of course I think can pass for fairly straight as a person, but so that's like an advantage, disadvantage, depends on how you present or if you're trans or whatever the case may be. But I found it to be fairly open, and like I never felt unsafe at all while I was in Spain.
And how was the weather? Classic question. Good to know.
Great. That's another thing. It kind of depends on where you are. So Spain there's a lot of different climates. Where I was in the south, it was warm most of the year. Of course, there was like a few months that were maybe a little bit chillier and you need like boots and a jacket. I will say it was actually quite cold one season, because they didn't have the buildings don't like have insulation like in the south, so they're not really prepared for super cold weather, and so it got weirdly cold during that time, and it was freezing indoors. So I was like walking around with my little heater. But for the most part, that was like 2 months out of the whole year. For the most part, it was really, really warm. It's always kind of like a spring. Summer comes on really fast and gets really hot, probably in like April, May. And then the rest of it kind of just feels like spring, except for the 1 or 2 months where it's a little chilly.
Okay, now interesting. I've got a couple more questions here to ask. We've got about 10 minutes till the end of the hour, although we're not necessarily in a rush to finish then. So if you've got any more questions you'd like to drop into the chat, do so now, and I'll start sort of wrapping them up in the next couple of minutes if you can. Do you get Dianni, do you get to express a preference for the students or the class that you teach? So, for example, if you'd rather teach 5-year-olds than 6-year-olds or 8-year-olds or 10-year-olds or whatever.
No, that's not something you get to decide, unfortunately. Because when I went in, I really wanted to just work with younger students. But if the school needs you spread out amongst all of the different classes, then you kind of just have to do that. And I actually realized that I really enjoyed working with the older students, like the 5th and 6th grade, when I thought that I would prefer the younger kids. So it also gives you an opportunity to explore more than you think, like, oh, I just want the cute little ones. They're actually a lot more work, but you don't really get to choose. That's not up to you. Sorry.
Yeah, I think, no, fair enough, and well answered. Is there a limit of the number of years you can do this? Do you know? Because you mentioned you had a friend who'd done it 2 or 3 years running.
Yeah, she's actually on her 3rd year now. And so I'm pretty sure 4 years is the max number of years you can do this in a row.
I suppose.
Sorry, go ahead.
Cool. I was saying, I suppose because it's a short time of the year, you'd have to go back to the States or go somewhere else for the summertime or whatever, wouldn't you? It would be quite complicated.
And you have to apply again. So there's a whole like renewing your application, renewing your visa, all those things. So it's a little bit of a different process. And I'm pretty sure after like your 2nd year, first time applicants take precedent over people who are reapplying. Not to say that like you can't, but maybe you have a lesser chance of getting the region or something that you want. But you can apply up to 4 different times and continue. I know people who are on their 3rd, 4th year doing it.
I would expect if and I don't know, I'm making this up, but I would expect that if you really liked it, there would be a way, and you and the school obviously loved working with you, there would be a way they could sponsor you to have a more permanent sort of position working there, or something like this, you know.
Possibly. or you can just, if you're going to do the program again and you love your placement, you love your school. I know people who have like discussed it with their school and they reapply for that same school the next year. Like they just choose each other. Like, I want to stay here. I want to do this one again. So that's also a possibility if you end up really loving it your first year.
No, good. Well answered. Good question as well. So a clarification from Lauren. So first you apply, then once you're approved, that's when you go and get the visa. You don't get the visa. You have to do the application first, then the visa, then the consulate trip, in that order.
So it's the application for the program specifically. So that's where you do your statement of purpose, all of those other things. Once that's accepted and you have your application accepted, then you can move on to the visa process. I would say the first thing to do when you start your visa process is make the appointment at the consulate, because that's the thing that can take a long time. Maybe that's 2 months out. So make the appointment first and then start to gather all of your documents and everything, get the background check, all those things in line, but make sure you can make your consulate appointment first. So application, visa, but consulate first, and then the rest of the visa process.
Particularly if the consulate's 1,000 miles away, it will be a bit of an effort to get there.
Yeah, it's a bit more work.
Yeah. A couple of people asking for things like things that were in the presentation. I'm pretty sure the presentation will be shared in the follow-up email, I imagine.
Yes, it will be.
Yeah, great. So people asking questions about that, just hold on and I think it'll probably come out to you tomorrow. You'll get this and you can check those things yourself.
The name of the Facebook group.
Yeah, I think that'll be on the list right now.
I can just go back to that slide too.
Oh, sure.
Where was it? That's not it.
So
these are a few.
There you are, David. Take a screenshot of that quickly, or or photographics?
There are a few. Like I mentioned, once you know your region, you can go into more specific Facebook groups like Auxiliares de Conversación and then the specific region, which I think will be a lot more helpful for you. But these are just some like general ones you can start to look up and add yourself to while you're doing the application process. And they can be really helpful. Like people ask questions about the application process. Maybe you're stuck on something. It's a really helpful space to be in. So.
And did you teach completely in English, or did you use Spanish in the classroom as well?
That's a good question. Because like I said, where I was, the level of English was fairly low. I would have to use some Spanish, because if not, they wouldn't understand me at all. So there was a little bit of both that I had to use. You're technically not supposed to use any Spanish. Like with this job, you're supposed to speak only English to them, but I there's exceptions if they're just not if they're not going to understand anything. So I would use a little bit in the beginning, maybe, and then as the time went on and they became more used to the vocab or like me saying certain commands or things in English, then I would just switch fully to English.
Fantastic, great, good to hear. I've just posted, Dianni, your socials in the chat again. So if you're interested, if you've got any further questions, or this is something you're seriously considering, add Dianni now on there, follow her, whatever, all of those sorts of things, so that you can ask questions, because it's always the way, isn't it? You go on the chat, and then tonight something will come up and you'll say, oh, I wish I'd asked this, I'd asked this question. So they're there. Dianni, thank you so much. This has been fantastic. It's been great to hear about your experience.
Of course. I'm so happy I got to share. And like you said, of course, if you realize later on you have any other questions or things that you want to know, feel free to send me a message. I'm super happy to answer any questions. But I'm glad you found this helpful, and I hope you end up teaching in Spain. I would love to know if you do apply and end up doing this, tell me, because I would love to know if you end up doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be great to hear. So hear what your impact has been, because these events do make a difference. Speaking of which, there's a few on the screen now that are coming up in the next couple of days. And for all of our events, you can head over to thenomadicnetwork.com/events. They are the online ones, and here and there are in-person ones now as well, following on the same link. So go and see if there's any in your city. Also, the group tours are booking at the moment for this summer. I know some of them are full up already. Some still have spaces. If you fancy traveling with a load of like-minded travelers as part of the Nomadic Network group tours, head over to the website there, thenomadicnetwork.com/tours, and check that out. Thank you, Dianni, for a wonderful presentation. Thank you, everyone, for listening at home. I've really enjoyed this, and I hope to see you again very soon.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. Bye.
Bye.